I've entitled my thoughts for today, A Worthwhile Pursuit. And we'll be looking at Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 25 to 33. I well remember the first day of my grade 12 English composition class. In our large regional high school where multiple teachers taught grade 12 English, I was apprehensive about ending up in Mr. Whiteman's class because of his stern and demanding reputation. Of all the teachers who taught English, he was known to be the one who insisted on his students learning grammar. On that first day, he informed us that by the end of the semester, each of us would be able to stand at the front of the class and identify the grammatical function belonging to every word in any sentence. I glanced around the room, recognizing several classmates who were not known for their academic prowess, and wondered how they would be able to master the grammatical intricacies of gerunds, participles, relative pronouns, prepositional phrases, and the umpteen other grammatical classifications. Despite his intimidating reputation, I discovered that Mr. Whiteman not only loved teaching, but that he was gifted. And to my amazement, in short order, the most unlikely student was indeed able to go to the front of the class and identify the grammatical function of every word in any sentence. What I didn't anticipate back then was the importance that grammar would play in my own life. Not so many years later, I was studying Spanish in preparation for ministry in Mexico, and I was regularly grateful for the understanding of grammar I had gained from Mr. Whiteman. Some years after that, I was in seminary struggling to learn the grammar of ancient Greek and Hebrew. Please don't test me on it now. And again, I was grateful for Mr. Whiteman's instruction. To this day, whenever grammatical knowledge helps me grasp the meaning of biblical truth, I remember Mr. Whiteman. If I ask you to think of a favorite teacher, I suspect a particular teacher comes to mind because that teacher impacted you more than others. If someone asks me about my favorite teacher, I immediately picture a trim, white-haired man who, near the end of his teaching career, passed on to me an appreciation for grammar. No matter what we are serious about wanting to learn in life, we seek to learn from the best source we can. Whether we want to learn grammar, build houses, become doctors, play hockey, develop minds, or even become a thief, we seek the best instructors available because we want to know that we learned from the best. In turn, from whom we have learned has a lot to do with who we have become. Very often, the most demanding of our instructors are the ones who benefit us the most. The Bible uses a particular word to describe the process of learning from another person. That word is discipleship. I have to confess that I feel uneasy talking about discipleship. In theological circles, any discussion about discipleship usually sounds formidable. As a young person, it seemed that whenever I would attend a missions conference, which was surprisingly frequently, there would be a sermon on the cost of discipleship, where we listeners were made to feel guilty for not measuring up. I don't think, though, that when Jesus talked about discipleship, he was trying to make people feel guilty for not measuring up. Rather, like much of his teaching, Jesus presented discipleship as a possibility which we can all experience. Here's what Jesus taught about discipleship in Luke 14, verses 25 to 33, where it says, "Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and wasn't able to finish.' Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." Why did Jesus make discipleship sound so harsh? Even though we associate the word discipleship with Jesus, we're wrong to assume that being a disciple was unique to following Jesus, because all of us choose those of whom we wish to be disciples. Opponents of Jesus, for instance, claim to be disciples of Moses. It's in John 9:28. The Apostle Paul had been a disciple or a student of Gamaliel. That's in Acts 22, verse 3. That's why it's noteworthy that Jesus talked about my disciple. For instance, he said, "Such a person cannot be my disciple." In other words, there was nothing stopping them from being someone else's disciple, but they wouldn't be Jesus' disciple. With that in mind, here's a definition of discipleship I find helpful, and this comes from the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology. A disciple is one who seeks another to acquire that person's practical and theoretical knowledge. According to this definition, we can't call ourselves a disciple unless our lives reflect our teacher's knowledge. Apparently, Jesus wasn't seeing the knowledge he was sharing being reflected in the people coming to hear him. There's no question that the people we encounter in Luke 14:25-33 in the passage we read viewed Jesus as a desirable teacher, but that didn't automatically make them disciples. There were many reasons to account for the large groups of people accompanying Jesus. For instance, Jesus was interesting. He told stories and gave life lessons that were captivating and never boring. Then, Jesus was trendy. People were continually impressed that he was different from other teachers. One of Jesus' favorite sayings was, "You have heard it said, but I say." Everyone loves a new perspective. Along with his new teaching, Jesus sounded liberating rather than oppressive like the traditional religious leaders. Jesus was like an exciting revolutionary. Jesus provoked controversy, and it's exhilarating when you don't know what will happen next. The truth was that amazing things happened. If you had no other reason, curiosity would have been enough to have followed Jesus. Of course, you never knew when you might get a freebie. You might get healed, you might get fed. Nothing attracts a following like the prospect of free stuff. But did following Jesus around and listening to his teaching make a person Jesus' disciple? Not necessarily. Not if their lives didn't reflect Jesus' teaching. What we may miss through our familiarity with the stories of Jesus is that being called a disciple was a huge privilege. It was a point of pride to be a prominent teacher's disciple, much like someone today might promote themselves as being a graduate, say, of Harvard University. In the Jewish tradition, people would seek out a teacher who would take them on as a disciple, and they would usually pay to gain that teacher's knowledge. The mistake that the crowds chasing after Jesus made was that they assumed that listening to Jesus was enough to be considered a disciple of a popular teacher. Even though they had witnessed his miracles and they had heard his instructions, they had completely missed what being a disciple of Jesus required. Jesus didn't require financial payment, and he wasn't interested in an ability to regurgitate his teachings, but he did have a high demand. To be a disciple of Jesus required the goal of becoming like Jesus. It's a lesson we can easily miss today, just as the crowds described in Luke 14 missed it. More than viewing Jesus as an interesting teacher, being a disciple of Jesus requires designating him as a primary core relationship. I wonder how people reacted to Jesus' shocking words. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Did Jesus really mean that we need to hate everyone but him? Of course not. Jesus also said that people would know we are his disciples by our love for one another. And he even challenged us to love our enemies. It's helpful to recognize that the word hate in the Bible does not carry the same meaning that we give it today. A similar statement to this one in Matthew 10:37 doesn't use the word hate, but says, anyone who loves his father or mother, son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. In other words, hate in the Bible can simply mean to love less. English Bibles typically say in Genesis chapter 29:31 that Jacob loved Leah less than Rachel. But literally translated, it would say that Jacob hated Leah. We get it. Sons or daughters who feel loved less than their siblings can easily interpret less love as hate. Apparently, giving God less love is not conducive to being called a disciple of Jesus. Jesus' words remind us that our lives are patterned after our primary core relationships. Our core relationships are those which we are going to work hardest to protect. Peer pressure, for example, is so powerful in students' lives because children and adolescents in school often feel like life will end if their core friends reject them. As a result, they sometimes make poor life choices as part of the cost of protecting those primary chosen relationships. A primary core relationship doesn't even have to be with a person. It can be with a career, a business, a lifestyle, a hobby, or even our favorite stuff, which is probably a problem. When it comes to our primary core relationships, we have to ask if the cost they demand benefits or detracts from whom we want to become. For the people who had been accompanying and listening to Jesus, they would probably all have affirmed that they would like to have claimed Jesus as a primary core relationship. From Jesus' point of view, however, he questioned their resolve in paying the cost for protecting a primary core relationship with him. That's why his challenge to them sounded so harsh. For instance, Jesus talked about carrying a cross. I think he was saying that being a disciple requires recognizing value in suffering. We understand that some of our greatest lessons and accomplishments will happen through suffering, but the cost is high. Jesus also talked about the importance of commitment. We understand the importance of commitment to a primary core relationship, but again, the cost of that commitment can be high. At its essence, discipleship boils down to the simple question Peter once put forward to Jesus. To whom shall we go? He asked. That's in John 6, verse 68. Throughout our lives, all of us will choose to answer that question in one form or another. Peter answered his own question with this statement: you have the words of eternal life. If we are convinced that the knowledge Jesus offers is what we want reflected in our lives, then the cost of discipleship will always be worth it.